Ebenezer, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we're going to start the meeting now.
Okay, good.
And do I click on this start webinar on this thing as well?
Yeah. Okay, you got it.
All right,
The committee will start.
great. So it's 7:05 p.m. on Wednesday, June 5th. I'd like to welcome everyone to the June meeting of the Land Use Committee of Manhattan Community Board 12. I am Wayne Benjamin and I chair Land Use for CB12. And before we begin, I'd like to have some of my fellow committee members introduce themselves, starting at my right.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anthony Viola. I am the Secretary of Community Board 12, and I also serve on the Licensing Committee and the Bylaws Task Force. Nice to meet you.
Hi, my name is Daniel Bonilla. I'm also on the Parks and Cultural Affairs Committee, and I am your fellow neighborhood member.
Hi, I'm Heidi Guzman. I am also on the Health and Environment Committee and another community member.
I think we're all community.
Well, yeah, technically.
Well, no, you can live in, well, you have to have.
And you are?
That is true.
I don't
have a
know.
business up here.
I'm Jim Berlin. I've been on the community board a long time. I'm a member of the Traffic and Transportation Committee as well, and I am the parliamentarian of the board.
And online, we have a committee member. Tracy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tracy McNeil, part of Land Use Community Board 12. Hello, in virtual space with many of you. I'm looking forward to tonight's meeting.
Okay, and also a board member, not a member of the Land Use Committee. We have Indiana. Indiana, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. Hello, all. I'm Indiana Porta. I am a member of the Community Board and I sit on the Housing and Human Services Committee and also on the Public Safety Committee, but I'm very interested in, the work of the Land Use Committee and helping out any way I can. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a few items on the agenda, and I think all of them were discussed at prior meetings, but it's at this meeting where
Public
it's our
safety,
intention
Atlantis.
to
It's down the hall.
down the hall. Thank you. It's our intention
No
to
problem.
vote on them. So the first item on the agenda pertains to the Faith-Based Affordable Housing Act, which was a bill included in the recently adopted state budget. And the reason it came to the attention of the Land Use Committee is there was concern on the part of some stakeholders in the preservation community that the way it was written might weaken or threaten buildings that are landmarked. We reviewed the bill. We actually coordinated with one of the sponsors of the bill. Two of our Land Use Committee members are, in fact, attorneys and read through it, and three of them.
Three of us are attorneys.
Oh, wow.
Okay, well, two of them at the last meeting said they read through it and based upon their reading, the language clearly states that it does not override any landmark designation. That notwithstanding, the sponsors indicated they were tweaking various aspects of the bill, and although they, disagreed that the original writing of the bill in any way could be read to override or leave open the window to overriding any landmark designation, they said they were more than happy to clarify the language, which was done. So in the current version, item number 8, which is on page 6, reads, "Nothing in this section shall be interpreted to override the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code Act, the Freshwater Wetlands Act, the Public Health Law, or any regulations, restrictions, limitations, or conditions existing as of the effective date of this section which may have been placed upon a site, building, or structure designated as a landmark or containing an interior landmark or in a historic district under any local law, regulation, resolution, ordinance governing the demolition, construction, reconstruction, alteration, and or other work on or near such site, building, or structure. So I think that's very clear that it says that, nothing shall be interpreted that it overrides any number of things, but including landmark.
Good.
And so at the last meeting, when we discussed this, we, I think, agreed in principle that, pending clarification of that language, we had, no objection and would recommend to our state elected officials that, they support the act. We were coordinating with Housing and Human Services because at the end of the day, it is the faith-based Affordable Housing Act. So whatever action land use takes, we may get some additional feedback from Housing and Human Services, but that will not be pertaining to what we focused on, which is whether or not it threatened designated buildings, but whether or not they had any comments on the affordability tiers that are outlined. And for cities of 1 million or more, so that would be New York City, there are 3 affordability tiers, one of which requires 25% of the units to be affordable at 60% AMI, with a minimum of 5% being affordable at 40% AMI. The other tier is for 30% of the building's units to be affordable at 80% of AMI. And then the third tier is for 20% of the units to be affordable at 40%. And what we noticed reading through that is among the 3 options, the highest percentage required is only 30% of the units. So for the most part, the building is, predominantly a market rate building with, between, depending on which one you pick, 20 to 30% affordable at different ranges. And the question is whether or not Housing and Human Services thought that was a reasonable structure. I think it mirrors what is required by MIH, or whether there was a recommendation that the state look into increasing or slightly increasing the, minimum required number of units. So that's what I expect to hear from Housing and Human Services on at their meeting, which is tomorrow. But in terms of the faith-based Affordable Housing Act, comments, questions from the committee?
I'm satisfied with the
Okay.
revisions.
Is,
I have a comment.
yes,
Because in the past, we had initiatives, I think that this covers, where a developer buys the property of a religious institution, and then they build some part of it as a new sanctuary and operate it as a kind of a separate thing, But I have a sense, or I have had a sense, and it's only a sense, that less than scrupulous developers can use this to cheat religious institutions. And I don't know whether we've seen it in the past, but it certainly looks like the sort of thing that could happen. Is there anything we know of in this legislation that prevents that?
actually, one of the things this legislation requires, and it's based exactly on what you said, it requires the faith-based institution to basically do the equivalent of what a first-time homebuyer would do. They have to take a counseling course on the development process. I mean, that's maybe not how it's called, but they have to, understand, the process. And, this act isn't necessarily geared at having the faith-based institutions sell their property, but it gives them greater flexibility to put it into a development project where current zoning limits that. But you're absolutely right, many churches and nonprofits, or folks in general, I mean, development is a complicated process. And if you don't know how to value your property, which is one of the things, there was a recent discussion. If you don't know how to value your property, you can be cheated. If you don't understand the development process, you can be cheated. So there's a requirement for, counseling.
Thank you.
Are we taking an action on this?
Well, that was my point. Is there a motion to support the act as the language is modified pertaining to landmarks?
I so move.
I second that motion.
So it was moved by Anthony and seconded by Jim. So what we're going to do is take a vote. And for those of you who may not have participated in the past, at committee meetings, members of the public can vote. At general meeting, only board members can vote, but at committee meetings, members of the public can vote. So we're first going to take the vote of the committee members. We will then take the vote of other board members present. And then I will ask if there are any members of the public present who would like to vote. And if so, if you're in favor, opposed, or abstaining. So for land use members, those in favor,
It's unanimous.
any opposed or abstaining? Okay. For board members present, anyone in favor?
I'm in favor.
Okay. And then we're now for members of the public, and you can use the raise your hand function to vote. So I see 4 members of the public present. Anyone who would like to vote in favor of this resolution, please raise your hand. Thank you. And you can put your hand down now. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Anyone abstaining? Thank you.
Was that for yes, 0, 0, 0 abstain?
It was
Or-
6 committee members in favor, 1 board member.
Oh, no, I meant the public.
The public, there was 1 person in favor and no one else voted.
Got it. Thank you.
So, thank you. The next item on the agenda is once again, something we discussed at the April meeting. And this was a presentation made to us by New York Presbyterian on their Cancer Plus building. And the campus of Columbia Medical is subject to what's called a large-scale development. So when there are new buildings constructed there, depending on what's being done, there is a city planning approval that's required. It is not ULURP, which is the Uniform Land Use Review. It's called an authorization. So in this case, the medical center, actually the hospital, is building a new cancer building, which will consolidate the functions of cancer treatment. We're currently scattered among various buildings. And for that, there are 4 zoning actions that are required. We, in April, were advised that the Department of City Planning intended to forward the application to us for the authorization sometime in, mid to late June, which is problematic. Everyone knows that the community boards go into, recess for the summer. So what we decided to do is, since all of the information, with the exception of the environmental assessment statement, was done, and that is what was holding up city planning forwarding the application to us, that we would consider the zoning actions, and, whatever we do would be subject to the final EIS. I found out yesterday that city planning intends to forward the application to us on Monday. Of course, Monday's too late because we're meeting today. But fortunately, we are moving along the lines that we intended to do. And with the environmental assessment being ready on Monday, if there's anything in that that is problematic, we have time between then and the executive committee meeting and the general board meeting to adjust our resolution accordingly. So as we discussed in April, the zoning actions that are required, pertain to moving around unused floor area to the location of the corner of 165th Street and Fort Washington Avenue, which is where the new building will be located. There's a requirement for some landscaped area to be relocated. And this is all sounds rather, minor, except, as I said, because it's subject to this large scale development plan, that's why they have to get approval to move around landscaped area. I think the more critical thing with the building is it is a 16-story building, but because the floor to ceiling heights for medical buildings are much taller than residential, it's the equivalent of a 30-story building. It's about the same height as the Hammer Signs building on 168th Street. So the building breaks what's called the sky exposure plane, at the corner of 165th and Fort Washington. So that's one of the zoning actions that is required. And then, of course, there's a lot coverage. Although the campus is owned all by the hospital and the university, technically the building is sitting on, a parcel, and they are moving some land from one parcel to the other to accommodate that. So those are the zoning actions that are before us. We had a very detailed discussion of, how cancer care is currently provided and, what it will be like to be in the facility and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, what's before the land use committee are just those zoning actions. And in terms of the plans, nothing has changed since the presentation that was given to us. So is there any committee discussion on the building? And I said we had an extensive discussion on that. And I do have the PowerPoint here if we need to review anything.
I have no problem with any of the things they are suggesting.
So I know that we have time, but should we stipulate any resolution we pass on the environment, like the results of the environmental impact?
I think that's our intention.
Okay, so then I also move to support that, to support this project, stipulating the results of Monday's environmental impact.
No second?
Sure. So that was Anthony.
Oh, and they keep on leaving things here, and I keep on eating them.
I want to take one soon.
So is there, from the committee, we have a motion on the floor to approve the zoning actions to facilitate construction of the Cancer Plus building. It is a motion that is subject to, the review of the environmental assessment, which we expect to have as part of the complete application on Monday. I believe that's correct, Audrey, Monday?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So this is entirely dependent on how quickly their environmental team can get, comments and revised documentation back to us. But we are aiming for Monday, so it's dependent on their applicant team. But I will let you know as soon as I know. And we can talk about, you know, any next steps in terms of there might be a way to vote and submit a waiver, or as you mentioned, talking about it at the executive committee meeting. But
Right.
let me get more clarity on that. But
Sure.
either way, I will let you know.
I received communications from, two people at Presbyterian yesterday indicating that the city planning team was planning to send it on Monday, which is, but
This is land
Yeah,
use.
This is land
there's two
use.
meetings, so public safety is down.
Yeah, public safety.
Down the hall.
down the hall.
You're welcome. No problem.
Yeah, so they're, I mean, we talk to them every day. And so we are waiting on their on their consultant to get the materials in, but as pretty much close to final as we can have is available on Zap publicly, and I'll share that link in the chat.
That's great. And so once again, it doesn't really impact how we're proceeding, because as I said, our approach was, since everything was available to us except for the EAS, it was our intention, in April, I think we said if we did not have the application in time for the June meeting, we would vote based upon, the preliminary materials that were available, which, detailed the project and the zoning actions. And that resolution, as Anthony just said, would be subject to, our review and comment on the EAS. So that's what we're doing now.
Sounds great.
What if due to some quirk, the EIS doesn't show up, or whatever it is, doesn't show up until after our general meeting? Will we suspend our action on this resolution since we don't know that part?
Well, I mean, it's still subject to that, and presumably, Catherine as chair would have the ability in July to finalize it based upon whatever the ES. But I mean, at the end of the day, your typical environmental assessment statement, if it identifies something, and Audrey, correct me, or Audrey and John, correct me if I'm wrong, if it identifies something that is an issue, it also identifies, how it will be mitigated. So it wouldn't say that, we're going to leave radioactive waste sitting on the corner. It's like, there's going to be radioactive waste and we're going to make sure that Godzilla eats it so that it no longer is available to humankind.
Does the one that is
Yeah,
filed
yeah.
already though, like, does it indicate that there are any issues? Like, I know it's not finalized per se, but does this version 2 indicate any major issues or substantial issues?
Did you hear that?
Guess that was a question for DCP.
Yeah. So we work closely with our environmental review team, but I am not the point person for the EAS. Let me get back to you on that. I want to be confident in my answer, and I frankly have not, read the whole thing. So I will certainly find that out and let you know.
As a general matter, if environmental review, if an EAS shows the potential for a significant adverse impact, then that's when you get kicked up into EIS land. And you're correct there that if potential significant adverse impacts are identified, then under state law, the applicant has an obligation to mitigate to the extent practicable. So I can't speak to this particular project, but that's the general framework. So if this project only has an EAS, then apparently it did not identify the potential for any significant adverse impacts. And therefore mitigation would not come into play.
Right. I mean,
Yeah, but that's when the developer is,
there's the hospital, it's not the developer.
the developer is the hospital.
Yes.
Okay, so the developer is deciding that and making determination, not a third party. So
Well, actually, is that true? I mean, isn't it city planning's environmental department that's making the determination, not Presbyterian?
That's correct. The lead agency typically for land use actions that go through ULURP, like this one, the lead agency is typically DCP.
DC,
And so while the applicant they hire the consultants and they do the environmental review work, we have to approve every aspect of it to make sure it's consistent with applicable law.
right.
Okay. So I think,
So we have a motion by Anthony to approve the zoning actions subject to the review of the EAS. It was seconded by Daniel.
I thought I made the motion.
you
Not
can,
that it matters.
you can put Jim's name. I made the first motion tonight.
So
Well,
committee members in favor? Committee members opposed? Abstaining? Okay, board members in favor?
I'm in favor.
Thank you. Opposed or abstaining? Let me do something because we may have. Chris Whitaker, are you a new board member?
Yes.
Yes, hi. Just listening in, but happy to be counted since we're
Yeah,
voting.
no, so I'm gonna move you to in my attendance list up there with Indiana as a board member that's present. And welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
Okay, so let me go back. So when I asked for board members who were in favor, did you raise your hand for that?
Yes, I was going to vote yes.
Okay, so that was 2. And members of the public, actually, I should ask. I see Linda Smith, I see Rita Calderon, and I see Susan Geller. If any of you are new CB12 members, because we have a bunch of them, would you raise your hand, please?
They're not.
They're not?
No.
Okay, thanks. So then members of the public, if you wish to vote on this resolution, those in favor, you can raise your hand. Thank you. Opposed, you can raise your hand. Thank you. You can put that down. And abstaining, you can raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So where we have it now is the resolution subject to, the EAS is approved. We will look forward to receipt of the EAS. And if I can check the calendar. So executive committee is meeting on the 17th. So if we get the EAS on Monday, the 10th or thereabouts, assuming there isn't anything that is overly complex, we'd be able to review that and determine whether the executive committee needs to take any action on the land use resolution to modify it. That then brings us to the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity Text Amendment. And I must say, and I think I shared with you, Audrey and Jose, that I received today and shared with the committee the 34-page memo with the questions and answers from CBs 9, 10, 11, and 12. And although, it's helpful and insightful, it's a lot to absorb the day of the meeting. So I'm not quite certain, what we're going to do with that. Of course, the committee has the presentation and the committee has the worksheet, which outlines the 15 goals of the text amendment. And I asked everyone to, review that and to, think about their position on each of the 15 goals, and I shared, my initial thoughts. But that was also before I got the opportunity to review some of the answers. So I'm interested in, what my committee members had to, what your reaction is, I think, initially to the various goals. And I, of course, realized that for the most part, you probably didn't have time to go through the 34 pages of Q&A. So the question then is, what do we do about that? But initial reactions. It is far too silent. So
I think the one that I feel,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Chair, is
Go
this
ahead.
something that can be shared with other community board members at this stage, or it can only be limited to the committee members?
you mean the 34-page document?
Yes.
I am more than happy to share it with everybody.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and just for reference, and I mean, it was a document that came in today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and basically what it is, I think you may have already seen the questions that CB 12 posed, but this memo consolidates the questions and answers for CBs 9, 10, 11, and 12. So it's the 4 Upper Manhattan community boards.
Got it. Thank you.
Amazing, I love it.
So you were saying, Anthony?
I think the only one that I feel either just not fully knowledgeable about and maybe even strongly against is the sliver law piece, because I think that kind of goes against, or we always talk about contextual zoning. If that were to go away, I think that would heavily impact that in our community. That's the one that I checked do not support on my checklist on.
Did you send this to us?
The check.
Yeah,
The checklist?
Yeah,
Twice.
yeah,
it's
the
on
worksheet.
The worksheet?
3 days ago.
Oh, that was the worksheet.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. And see, but that's an interesting point, because going through my list, and everyone sees when I got to the sliver law, I questioned it, and in the boxes said, what are the benefits? Reading through city planning's response to a question I believe was raised by CB 11, they went into, more detail about how if you're on a narrow site of like 45 feet or less, then the sliver law would still apply. And the rationale behind eliminating it, because it was written at a time when we didn't have contextual zoning and quality housing, I think was fairly new. And so if you have contextual zoning, then by its nature, the development would be capped. And if you're using quality housing, which also incorporates, it gives you, I think, a FAR bump, but it caps the building height. But, where is that, clearly discussed other than just now allowing narrow lots? So, understanding how it works, assuming that is, clear in the law, I don't have an issue with it. But the point is it clear
Right.
that, if it's a site that's 45 feet or less, the sliver law still applies. And it's also not clear to me that if you're on a site that is larger than 45 feet, that is not in a contextual district, and they are not using quality housing, that's when you would still have the tall, thin building. So, what happens then?
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt. If it's all right, I just wanted to share that John Manchin, who joined us last time, is one of the chief architects of the proposed text amendment, is on the line with us. So, if you have any questions, he and I are available to answer.
Yes.
And so you described the proposal amazingly clearly in that there will always be height limits that apply. It just is a question of which height limits. you're correct. If you're in a contextual district, that height limit applies. If you're in a non-contextual district using what was formerly known as the quality housing option, then that height limit applies. If, however, you are on a narrow lot, less than 45 feet, in a non-contextual district, and you are not doing what was formerly known as the quality housing option with a height limit, then sliver still exists and imposes a height limit on you. So there are no narrow lots in any situation that would be able to evade height limits entirely. It's just, are they the underlying contextual height limits, or is it the sliver?
That's helpful.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
I think my only thing that I had about like the whole city of yes thing was, is that there's like an emphasis on building bigger, like, that was like my only thing where it's just like, I get it that building bigger is like great, but then it seems like what about like all the other spaces that we could have had that could have been updated instead of like, I guess like building so much, you know? That's like my only thing with the whole city of yes. There definitely is like places that I'm not even like too sure, but it's just like every time I see a lot of like the presentations, like, oh, we could build bigger, we could do this, we could add more, we could add, and I get it is for most of it is like for like affordable housing, but why not just like build quality sized buildings and it's just instead of like making it like 500 units.
What do you mean by quality size?
I don't know, like, let's say, yeah.
Mid-rise.
Well, remember, this is a citywide text amendment. So in a area that has, you know, sort of R3 zoning, what could be built there is very different than what could be built in our neighborhood, which has like R7-2 and R8 and R7A. So, you know,
It's like
big is relative.
Yeah, I see it more as like, okay, like in the future, because like obviously like 50, 60 years from today, this like a lot of places weren't like this. So it's like every other like 10 years, it's gonna seem like, oh, like let's just add a little more, let's just add a little more, let's keep on adding a little more. And then it just gets to the point where everything is just like overwhelmed with a little bit more of everything. I don't see it as like 5 years from now, it's just like more of a like 20, 30 years down the line where then all these buildings are gonna be built way too big and like overlap, and especially like smaller neighborhoods like this. I get that just like having to like follow the federal standards is good, but sometimes like the federal standards doesn't, I don't know if like the federal standards
But
doesn't take
the zoning standards
AMI.
are city, they're not federal.
But I think like how they use like the AMI, like all those numbers.
Well, for housing affordability, but in terms of zoning and density, that's very much New York City.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No, I don't know. I don't want to talk too much.
I don't necessarily disagree. Like, I think obviously there is an emphasis on building more, which in an environment with a limited footprint, tall is better. I think like two of the things that they're doing is to like convert resident office to residential, which I don't think really applies in our district, unfortunately, because I don't really think there's any office buildings that could be converted, but they also, well, yes. Make this a studio.
You'll find places that it's just like a lot of them is just like office buildings, and you'll be surprised, like, oh my God, these are like, this is 1,000 units that could have been used like for apartment buildings. You know?
That's one of the proposals, isn't it?
Yeah, it is
And
one of the
then I think the
proposals,
other
but-
one is they like to basically have more studio and small apartments, although I think on the flip side of that is like, we need more family units.
Yeah,
Yes.
because it's like
Yeah.
down the line, like this is a neighborhood that has like a lot of families, so I would think like down the line, like we would like like a lot of like Hispanic people, like they like to live with their own families, like sons and mothers will, like sons and daughters will live with their mothers and fathers for like many years. There's like 4 or 5 like people like living in like one apartment and all that stuff. So I just like wonder, instead of like having it to be like, oh, like let's just tramp everybody in here, more emphasis on like, okay, like this neighborhood, it seems like this would be more beneficial, like to leave this here like that. You go to Chinatown, like it's kind of almost more or less like that, where it's just like, I don't know, it seems like more about like, oh, like this whole block, like families like live out over here and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Jim, Vivian, I see also Indiana.
I have a few comments based upon what you said. Hopefully they'll be helpful. A lot of office buildings that you might hope to turn into residential buildings are not designed to do that, and it's almost impossible to do that. So there are some, and in fact, there's one office building, they actually had to cut a hole straight down the middle to make an air shaft. Taking away all kinds of floor space and building new walls and all that. Only then could they make an apartment. So that's just something to keep in the back of mind. Now, the other idea of this initiative, sort of obvious, and I think we all picked up on it, is we feel there has to be more housing for the people who are already here and people who might want to come. So we have to create more housing. And then the other piece of it, and I think you're absolutely correct about how, you know, extended families like to live together and stuff. And one thing we have done as a committee over the years, when developers come to us, is we remind them that, for example, you know, in this neighborhood, we don't want an apartment building all of studios in 1 bedroom. We want 3 bedrooms just for the, so we as a committee have always been pushing that, and so we beat you to it. No, it's good.
Yeah, I hear you.
Vivian?
Yeah.
Do we lose our, I mean, I wasn't to say, but are we gonna lose our ability to have that be the case, though, if this were to take over City PS? I mean, that's my concern.
Yeah, I don't.
And I wondered about what I wanted to say is about the density in terms of putting backyard housing in. I mean, that seemed to be like from the late 19th century that you have another building behind a building. Why are we doing this again?
Is that a question for city planning?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, great.
you're taking away light, you're taking away, I mean.
Well, you raise a great point, and just piggybacking off the points that others were making about the need for more housing types, in particular housing potentially for larger families or multi-generational families. And so we are doing things across the range of densities in order to accommodate larger families, multi-generational families. For instance, you know, many other jurisdictions around the country have legalized accessory dwelling units. Whether that's a basement or an attic or a detached rear yard or a attached rear yard. And the research on that is really encouraging, actually. And what we found, if you look in places in California, I can send you some research out of the Furman Center at NYU, is that the types of folks who take advantage of that are demographic groups who tend to, you know, have more multi-generational families. And so we've seen a ton of take up among larger multi-generational families in cities in California that have legalized it. We also see middle income homeowners. You know, it's not the richest folks. They don't need the money. They don't need the space. So they don't do it. They got a big enough house already. But sort of folks in the middle of the income distribution who, you know, might need more space or might need more money for living expenses. And so I think of that as one of the, you know, the primary ways that we're trying to accommodate larger multi-generational families in lower density districts. In medium and higher density districts, the small and shared housing has gotten all the attention. Honestly, we're not trying to push people to create small and shared housing. We are actually trying to just get out of the way of a broader range of housing types. One of the underappreciated aspects in medium and high density districts is the way that our current zoning resolution makes it really hard to provide family-sized units. For instance, the combination of the way that our corridor regulations work and amenity regulations work, we give you a floor area exemption if your corridor is daylit on both sides. You have a 30-foot rear yard requirement. You have a 70% lot coverage maximum. You have 30-foot rear yard or 30-foot window to lot line requirements. You have a minimum dimension of 30 feet on courts. And what that has done is it has forced medium and high density developments into bar buildings with what's called a double loaded corridor, where you just have one long corridor going through the middle of this bar with apartments on either side. What does that result in? I can send you pictures actually. It results in apartments with only one exposure. You only have windows on one wall. Your kitchen doesn't have a window, your bathroom doesn't have a window. It really makes it difficult to provide larger family size units. And remember the corridor requirements, you got to have daylight on both ends if you want your floor area exemption. So places where larger units would naturally locate, the ends of the corridors, we basically made that illegal too. And so instead of a 3-bedroom at either end of the corridor, that gets split into 2 1-bedrooms on either side. So part of these regulations that haven't received a ton of attention are relaxing rear yard requirements, relaxing minimum lot size requirements, relaxing minimum court dimensions in a way that re-legalizes forms of housing that are pre-61 that we love because they had courtyards, because they had windows and kitchens and bathrooms, because you could even have an apartment with cross ventilation, which would be like a total fantasy today. And so I could send you pictures of bar buildings next to these older pre-61 buildings to show you what we're trying to bring back in a way that makes it much easier to provide a 3-bedroom apartment, a 4-bedroom apartment, things like that, that we render really difficult to do today. So we are not trying to create a bunch of apartment buildings with studios and 1-bedrooms. We're trying to allow that. But at the other end, we're also trying to facilitate, make it easier to do family units. And for affordable housing, you'll still have those bedroom mix requirements to ensure that at least half of those units are 2 or more bedrooms.
So John, what you just said is something I put a few hours ago in an email to Jose and Audrey. There's a discussion of how the zoning forces the double loaded corridor, and I know exactly what you're talking about. But what are the other building types that the changes to the zoning are seeking to encourage? And it'd be great to have some images of that so people know what we're talking about. And perhaps one of the reasons why some of the aspects of it didn't get as much attention is there's a lot of stuff in this zoning text amendment and, not a lot of time to go through it. And, even today is the first time I'm really paying attention to the fact that there are changes to lot coverage and the, size of rear yards and whatever. So there's a lot in this. But if you could send some images of, this is a simple, stupid, double-loaded corridor, although you can do better and worse things with double-loaded corridors. And this is some of the examples of older building types. And we know what you're talking about because we live in those buildings, the building stock up here is for the most part old building stock. And I live in a building that you could not build today. I think, my committee member to my left lives in a building you couldn't build today, which is not to say they're great buildings. But, some images of what we're talking about. And what I find problematic is some of the discussion of the Dakota or the San Remo, all of these, references to luxury apartment buildings doesn't really help because it's all, well, okay, but, they were not affordable when they were built. And is city planning pushing changes that are really going to push for, luxury market rate buildings? So I think some of the images of, the building types that we know and love that we cannot build today. There was actually an article in the New York Times several years ago that looked at that very thing citywide. That would be helpful. Indiana. Indiana, the screen is yours.
Yep, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. I would just like to start out by saying that I understand that this is a huge undertaking to educate, New Yorkers about such a complicated process. And I've got experience trying to do that. I worked for city government. I worked on like a charter revision commission and trying to, get on point feedback from the community on very technical things is difficult. I understand that. personally, right, like in my personal capacity, I am very disappointed about the timeline of this. I have tried to be very engaged on the outreach and the education efforts. I testified, I forgot what the meeting is called, but the October presentation where you solicited, I looked today at the report, I'm included, you know, my comments are included in there multiple times. I've done the information sessions and, you know, all of the different opportunities, right? And I'm now a member of the community board and get this opportunity to ask you questions directly. And I just want to express, like, first and foremost, a little bit of concern, right? That this is very rushed. The substantive question that I have is maybe directly related, right? Like, whenever you have the you'll have to forgive the name, but like the Universal Affordability Program, for example, I couldn't find anywhere in the information that was available, can a developer, like if they decide that the affordable units, I know they have to average out to 60% AMI, but let's say they do like only a couple of units at a very low AMI, lower than 60%, and then the rest are at high AMIs. Do they have full discretion on what that breakdown is, right? Could they have let's say that they have 10, right? Could they have 2 or 3 units that are at 30% AMI and then the rest as high as possible of the affordable units? The other question I had was, once they determine the breakdown for the affordable units of like what AMIs they're going to use to fill them, is that permanent, or in 2 years, can they adjust the AMI distribution for the affordable units? You know, and there just hasn't been detailed information. And I think that that's what actually is going to make all the difference, right? Because if we're talking about units that are, even the affordable units are all going to be at 80% AMI, except for 2, you know, I have concerns about that. And I've got a full list of questions, but I will leave it there and give you guys the chance to elaborate.
Great. Yeah, so it's a weighted average. It depends not on the number of units at different AMIs, but on the overall floor area. There's no real way to game the system. Every proposal will have to be an average of 60% AMI. You can do no more than 3 income bands, and they all have to end in a 0. And then there's an absolute max of 100% AMI for any unit you provide. So if MIH income averaging is any indication, we'll see 30, 60, 90 and 40, 60, 80, basically. Which is exciting for us because to be able to hit every AMI band from, 30 to 90 with a program instead of, the existing IH programs where everything is at 80, sounds great to us. I can say that most of the feedback we get is we want as low AMIs as possible, but we do also get feedback from, Manhattan Community Board 4, like 100% isn't enough. Like, why are you limiting it to 100%? You're leaving a donut hole. There's housing for people at low incomes, there's housing for people at high incomes, but there's nothing for people in between. So while your commentary, your feedback is indicative, there are other folks who think that, that 100 is a little too restrictive.
And sorry, just the follow-up is, can they change the breakdown?
No.
And no, they cannot.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
so
permanent. Yeah, it goes into restrictive declaration that gets recorded against the property. And we also have text in there that it'll be recorded on your C of O too. So it's super easy for anybody to basically see which units are restricted and at what AMIs forever. It's recorded against the land.
Great, thank you, Chair. Just one tiny clarifying question. So the 3 bands that they have for the AMI, they're required to provide like 3 different ranges of AMI in the affordable housing, or they can do up to 3?
3 is the max.
Okay.
It's determined in conjunction with HPD, who, has some conversations around what they think they want to see. Developer discretion, though, most folks who've done MIH have done income bands rather than like everything at one AMI. And of course, it's not, council has made modifications to text in the past where they require a certain percentage at a certain AMI to like basically ensure that there's at least 2 bands going on. And who knows, that may happen here too.
Thank you.
Could I say actually, OC then Jim.
So we just recently got rezoned. And I feel like we're gonna, get an additional, additional density in relation to neighborhoods that did not get rezoning recently. I'm talking about the last 5 or whatever, 3 or 5 years. In my view, I think DCP should look at neighborhood that got rezoned in the last, again, 3 to 5 years and said, you know what, you guys, we're gonna phase you into that program within, say, 10 years or so. We are not going to allow that to happen right away because we just got rezoned. And in our case, we got rezoned and we got the wonderful 30-story building. So I don't see how it's helping us. It's already not helping us because those apartments are, I think the average rent was $4,000 or so. So those apartments are already not affordable for our residents. So what we're doing, I'm sorry. This program will accelerate displacement. And so I think that we should not get put in with the rest of the city. I think that the inward rezoning should be calculated and got into that as if we were already in that program, because we already got, what do we get? 5,000 more apartments or so? I forget the number, but
It depends on how many are actually built, yes.
well, they're already building the buildings,
Yeah, but
right?
I can't tell you what the number is.
I understand, but we're already gonna have a few thousand more people, and nobody's even looking at like, school seats and subways and all that stuff. So I think that, I am personally gonna vote against this, primarily for that reason. And I don't think this program will work for Community Board 12. It's
So
just,
I think OC's comments fall, under a question that was raised at the last meeting, but also some of the questions that are in the Q&A is how the City of Vales for Housing Opportunity reconciles with or overlaps with neighborhood-based rezonings, because this is a citywide initiative. But it's a citywide initiative that when overlaid on, for example, the inward rezoning, it has additional impacts. And how are you looking at that?
These are great questions. So I want to say first off that the scale of a neighborhood rezoning by far dwarfs anything that CHO is attempting. Neighborhood rezonings result in significant changes in what the rezoned area allows. Gowanus is probably the most stark recent example. There's 8,000 units that are being built right now. I think Inwood, you have about, a staff member of mine pulled this up the other day, I think like between 15 and 1,700 units in the pipeline, 1,000 of which are affordable, actually. So that's pretty cool. But CHO, overall, in the environmental review, you can look at a map and see the different NTAs, the neighborhood tabulation areas that make up Community Board 12. Overall, CHO will enable an average of 0.7 units per acre over 15 years. So that's, from the perspective of any one neighborhood or site, it's really minuscule compared to the scale of a neighborhood rezoning.
No,
So I want
completely understand, but I think the point is, using OC's example, if you go to the inward rezoning, particularly along the Harlem River, if you go to 207th Street, those buildings are dramatically large. I mean, they dwarf the public housing projects to the south. So they're much bigger than anything else. So on top of, that rezoning, would not this City of Yes for Housing Opportunity allow future developments if they use, for example, the universal affordability to be, even incrementally bigger? And should there not be some consideration that, that rezoning has already allowed for a significant increase in density and, these provisions, or some of these provisions, should not be applicable?
Gotcha. So in general, the changes enabled in terms of bulk, in terms of FAR, everything else in Inwood for the neighborhood rezoning are just way more significant, like I said, than CHO. CHO would in some instances, in some districts, it varies district by district, we can refer back to the table. But typically in some districts, another story or another 2 stories in order to enable, when necessary, to accommodate additional affordable housing. So, if you went through a rezoning that enabled, I can't remember what the North Cove site is, what the heights available there are offhand. I was on Inwood rezoning, but that was a few years back. Obviously that's under construction, so it's not getting any bigger, but to the extent that it would enable more height, it would be very marginal compared to the initial Inwood rezoning, and only when necessary to accommodate additional affordable housing. So this is not dramatic change. The secret sauce here, the secret sauce to this proposal is entirely geography. It's the fact that for the first time ever, we're trying to look to the full range of New York City neighborhoods, from the lowest density sites to the highest density sites. If we do that, if we can actually do a little bit everywhere, then we don't need to do a lot anywhere. If, however, we start to say, oh, well, this area got rezoned, so it should be excluded. This area didn't get rezoned, so it should be excluded. That's what we heard last week. I was at a Brooklyn Community District 9 meeting, and they said, we didn't get rezoned, under all those Bloomberg down zonings, so we should be left out of this. Once we start making those exceptions, then all of a sudden we do have to make significant changes in particular places in order to address that fundamental problem, the problem of the housing shortage. And just one more thing to OC's point. The whole point of this is to, or one of the core points to this is to address the displacement pressure that we see in neighborhoods around the city. And I would say that Upper Manhattan is one of the areas experiencing some of the starkest displacement pressures around the city. When I think of displacement pressure, I think of Central Brooklyn. I think of, the Harlems, Washington Heights, parts of Inwood too, where, you're Washington Heights seeing pretty stark examples of ethnic succession, And what causes displacement pressures? Displacement pressure is caused when there's not enough housing for the people who want to live in a place, whether it's a neighborhood, whether it's a city, whatever. When there's not enough housing, people with money are going to probably get that housing over people who don't have the money, and it creates those pressures. So by enabling a ton of new housing and affordable housing in a very broad-based way geographically, one of the things that I am most hopeful for is that we can take some of the displacement pressure off of Upper Manhattan. When you can't build an Upper West Side and Upper East Side, where do you go? You go to Harlem. When you can't find housing there, where do you go? You keep going north until you can afford the housing. That puts a ton of pressure on neighborhoods like yours. And by taking a broad geographic approach, we are trying to spread that out to take pressure off of neighborhoods that are really getting hit hard under the status quo.
I see Tanisha and Indiana, but I just want to, I also want to get to some folks who it. I just want to make a point. I was reading through one of the responses, and they were talking about the affordability and what this text amendment, seeking to do. And I think it referenced, at 80% AMI, a 2-bedroom renting at $2,000 a month. And
it's
I think
more like 60. Yeah, 60% AMI, 2-bedroom is probably 2,000.
Right. But and we often talk about 60% AMI being a good fit for the neighborhood. But that was 60% AMI a few years ago. When you think about it, by federal definition, if you're paying 30% or more of your household income in rent, then you are, rent burdened. So at $2,000 a month, which is $24,000 a year, not to be rent burdened, so I did it if you were paying 29%, just to be 1% under, you need to make $83,000 a year for it to be, affordable. And a few years ago, 80-something% was 100% of AMI. So, the AMIs keep creeping up. And so when we look at the AMIs, and I think Daniel was making this point, sort of in the aggregate, it doesn't really tell the full story. And I think as a community board, and maybe all of the Uptown community boards need to take a harder look at, what those AMIs now represent, because maybe, 83,000 is not that much money to make, but maybe the population is not well represented by, an average of 83. I think the last time we checked, we were somewhere around 52 or 53 as our, AMI. So even at 60%, it's a big, it's a big issue. So I think Tanisha, you had your hand up.
You said I was next.
No, I said I wanted to get to on the screen and then come back to you.
No, you said I was next after.
Oh, forgive me. Jim is having he doesn't want me. So Jim, please.
Thank you. If you say something, then please. do
Yes,
what
but
you're
we
gonna say.
can also allow someone who hasn't spoken yet, but go
That
ahead.
is correct, but that is not what you
Go
said
ahead.
was going to happen.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Number one,
Here's
I
Steve.
agree with Indiana that rush processes can be very problematical and unfair and so on. So I am not happy with the speed at which this process is moving forward either. Now, the issue I want to bring up, and I'm sorry that I had to put my foot down, but there's a page in this PowerPoint we have. The heading is allowed contextual infill on campuses and irregular sites. Now, I want to make sure whether this is the same thing or analogous to what the Housing Authority wants to do by taking housing projects which were designed with green space between the buildings to provide air and light and such. And this arrangement, and it works better in some places than others, is known as towers and parks. I actually live in a development that consists of towers and a park, and it works extremely well. Not all of them do. But the thought of taking this intentionally provided green space, which, the architects of yore were not idiots, they had a reason for doing what they're doing, and then plunking all kinds of additional housing, taking away the light and air from the people who live there, on the part of the Housing Authority, I think is unacceptable. And if that's inherent in what you're talking about here, which it may not be, I think it's equally reprehensible. Thank you.
Okay, infill on non-contextual sites. Today, what happens is that when you get infill, you are prevented from doing height-limited contextual infill. You're forced to do tower in a park. So you get those tall, skinny buildings that everybody hates. I'm trying to think if in Manhattan Community Board 12, but think about 200 Amsterdam down in Community Board 7. Think about Claremont Hall down in Community Board 9 that leads to like years of battles and legal battles and political strife and everything else. And I feel bad. I kind of slink away because whose fault is that? It's the zoning resolutions. It's ours because we do not allow campuses that have development rights and that have footprint for developments to do modern height-limited contextual infill. We force them to do the types of buildings that neighborhoods hate. And so what we are trying to do here is to remove those obstacles in the zoning that force people to do the buildings that everybody hates, to do the buildings that people like, which tend to be the modern contextual height-limited infill. When it comes to NYCHA in particular, I've been working at city planning for about 10 years. I've done dozens of mayoral overrides for NYCHA. I confirmed, I was talking to Matt Charney in the real estate department today. Every single infill project they have done over the last 10 years has been 100% affordable. Every single one. And that's expected to continue into the future. So one of the bits of this proposal that I like the best are the incentives to get away from height factor, non-contextual development that everybody hates, and enable contextual height limited infill that people don't tend to hate. And also at the same time, facilitate NYCHA's efforts to do 100% affordable on their sites. Because they've had to do mayoral zoning overrides over the last 10 years, and it takes 2 years, it costs a lot of money, and it shouldn't take that long to put 100% senior affordable on an empty parking lot. So these are good, these are not reprehensible. I'm happy to go in as much detail as you like, but these are things that will make people happy who hate the height factor buildings, make people happy who need affordable housing, and also provide, a lifeline to NYCHA, which can always use the help.
Yeah. So to the point of more detail, going back to the 32-page memo. No, I mean, there's a lot of good information in there, and it would have been, beneficial if we got it sooner. And, the process really isn't any faster than any other. We always have 60 days. The problem is when we're getting the information, but there is a good explanation of how that campus infill proposal or goal would work. And, it would require, contextual, it would require affordability. So, I mean, but the problem with the worksheet is it doesn't give you that level of detail, but for that matter, I don't know if in the presentations we have it as that level of detail. So I would encourage everyone to, take a look at that. I would also point out that I'm familiar with a couple of infill developments on NYCHA site, one in East Harlem, and another one here, and I guess Central Harlem, where, I mean, those are occurring on, parking lots or where they had the trash compactors, and buildings. One building happens to be significantly smaller than the others, and one is about as tall. It depends on what you do, but take a look at that document. A lot of good answers to questions, some of which we raised, and some of which our other community boards have raised. Tanisha.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, DCP. So yes, it's a lot of moving parts. It's very complex. But I want to focus on a couple of things, right? First of all, where do so-called low income or fixed income people who need housing fit into this? Because if you on SSD and your income is $950 a month, you can't afford a 2-bedroom, 2,000 apartment. So where is the concern for the fixed income people? We'll just say that. And my second question, my biggest reason, also I'm on the Housing and Human Services Committee. I'm sure you've seen me before. But my biggest concern, my biggest reason for probably going to vote against this is the no guarantee, is the incentives to the builders for tax breaks for 20, 40 years, whatever it is, to actually build and sustain this affordable housing. And I say that into parentheses. So if you could just elaborate on those 2 points and how that's going to work, and why are y'all, because you keep saying hopeful, John. You keep saying hopefully.
Thanks, Tanisha. No, that's great.
I don't want hopefully. I want guaranteed for, the people in the community of Community Board 12 in this district.
No, those are great points. I'll go out and I'll say that UAP, because it takes an existing inclusionary framework that works, that produces affordable units today, and extends it across all medium and high density districts. So it's not like something new. It's taking a framework that works and just blowing it out, multiplying the geography by 10. We will produce more affordable units at lower incomes in 10 to 15 years than we have through all zoning programs for affordable housing since their inception in 1987. This will create so many income restricted homes, again, because of that geography. Everywhere in the city, in medium and high density districts, if you want to max out your site, the only way to do that is to provide permanently affordable housing at an average of 60% AMI. And so to your first questions, first, enabling income averaging. We fully expect, like I said, based on existing programs like MIH, that we will see 30, 60, 90, we'll see 40, 60, 80. A 30% unit, that's $1,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. So now we're talking, and that is privately financed. That's without any HPD subsidy at all. That means HPD has their money left over to work with the zoning changes in order to create 100% affordable housing through things like ELA, the extremely low and low income term sheet, through things like SARA for senior housing, for supportive housing as well. And that's where you reach the really low incomes as well, even below 30, through those 100% affordable projects. We are working hand in glove with HPD on these zoning changes for that. And then finally, not to be forgotten, voucher holders. Voucher holders disproportionately win lotteries for these affordable housing units created through the zoning. And so the more of these affordable housing, the more affordable housing we can create through the zoning, the more it benefits voucher holders who today can have a hard time finding housing, that they can afford on the open market. And again, the tax benefits are temporary, but the affordable housing is permanent. It goes in a restricted declaration, it gets recorded against the land, it gets recorded on the C of O. HPD is really good at enforcing these units, and that's forever. So if you are in favor of affordable housing, you should definitely not vote no against this, because the world without these zoning changes has probably, in 10 years from now, we have 20,000 fewer affordable apartments at an average of 60% AMI. That is not a world that is going to be good for people who are searching for housing in this city. So I hope that you will reconsider a no vote, because we are going to create tens of thousands of units of income restricted housing through these proposals.
Just real quick follow-up, Wayne. I understand all of that, John, and that sounds amazing. The issue is that people in our community don't have 10 to 15 years to wait. We need that housing now. So how is that going to help the people now that need affordable, deeply affordable housing? And we can't wait. Do you want me to tell the community members, okay, well, this is going to happen in 10, 15 years. So hopefully you can hold on until.
I mean, shovels are going to be going in the ground as soon as these zoning changes are enacted, if they are enacted. And so you will see a rolling succession of new development in the neighborhood, much like you've seen after the Inwood rezoning. It takes a while for zoning to pay off. The North Cove units aren't occupied yet, but they've been a long time coming. And pretty soon there's going to be a few hundred new income restricted units at really good low incomes. If we hadn't planned for that 5 years ago, they wouldn't be coming online now. So we constantly have to be planning for the future. And so the question, what do we do for people now, is, for me, 5 or 6 years ago, when we were planning North Cove, for instance, or when we were planning other, One Flushing or other affordable developments that I've worked on that take a few years to come to fruition. So, we're doing the work now for people who need housing in a few years, and it'll keep paying off into the future as well. That's planning's job.
But I would also, point out that it's HPD's job to put in place the programs that deliver the affordable housing. I mean, planning can put in place the structure, but city planning doesn't make the developments happen, and they don't control the subsidies. So it's also a question, and primarily a question, for, HPD, what is it doing and how is it, working to address this? Indiana. Well, who we trust is not the point. The person who has the responsibility. That's.
No, I'm sorry, Indiana. That is the point. If we can't trust the people that are supposed to do their job, we know that there are many problems with HPD. So what I'm saying is the trust of the people is not there that they're going to do what they're supposed to do. That's what I'm
But the
saying.
point is, it's their responsibility and they have to be held to that responsibility.
Indiana? Thank you.
Yes.
I think to add just quickly to
Good.
that point is, for example, this is an opportunity though to tie into some of the other initiatives that the mayor has put forth about homelessness, right? Like I think he did some sort of blueprint for housing and that had, I don't see like integration there, right? If we're really taking a look at revamping something that is decades old, right? Our code, we're way like in huge need of a revamp. This is the opportunity to be intentional about the housing plan, right, for our lowest income New Yorkers. I will leave that there because Tanisha did an excellent job, but just I support what she's saying 100%. My follow-up question was about the I believe it's called like small unit. I forgot the name. I'm sorry. Let me see. I've got it here.
Small and shared housing?
Yes, small and shared housing proposal. Thank you. Do you envision that being run just like normal apartments, right? Or do you envision there being like a central like a dorm, right? Because when I think about that model of housing where it's basically people have individual rooms and then shared common areas, right? That's kind of like how our city shelters, some of them are structured. And there is a lot of conflict that happens, right? You've got personality differences, you've got scheduling differences, a night owl versus someone who goes to bed at 7. Is there going to be like a central entity that is in charge of the rules of that building that is like, I think, more heavily engaged than an apartment landlord would be?
Yes, I mean, so the core shared housing proposals emerge from work that HPD's been doing since before the pandemic for regulatory agreement projects. And, they have some experience with that. And we've definitely talked to providers of various types of affordable housing that, in many instances operate along similar lines today, but just to try to formalize some of the best practices there. And I'll say under this administration in recent years, we've also looked to other jurisdictions around the country that have legalized shared housing outside of a regulatory agreement model. And it's worked really well. For populations as diverse as young folks just coming out of college, kind of continuing the dorm-like living experience as they take their first jobs, to older households, to some marginally housed households. I'll tell you that one of the things I'm most excited about with our non-regulatory agreement shared housing proposals is to be able to formalize, to legalize some living arrangements right now that are not totally legal in places like Chinatown, where we're trying to preserve some of those living arrangements and protect tenants who would otherwise be vulnerable. So, full range, everybody from tech bros to like very marginally housed folks who, maybe in times past would have lived in what we call SROs. But yes, outside of the zoning, in the housing maintenance code, there will be regulations around things like maximum number of people per bathroom, which is like just going to be like 2 or 3 or something like that. Maximum number of people per refrigerator. And then also that adopts management best practices from other jurisdictions who have legalized this form of housing, but recognize that it takes a little bit more than just saying, go ahead, and do it. It does, like you say, take some amount of oversight over the management structure. That said, we've looked to other jurisdictions, we've looked to New York City's past, and we think that this is a niche of the housing market that's really worth filling.
But to Indiana's question, and I think this is a question that CB12 and others raised, it's really not clear what type of housing city planning seeks to incentivize by this small and shared housing. And I think the question I asked is, are you basically looking at the old, residential hotel? And the response was, no, because, residential hotels are transitory and, this is permanent. But I mean, transitory or permanent is just a matter of, you know, those rules, but in terms of the physical layout, in a hotel, you have your own room and your own bathroom. SROs, typically you don't have your own bathroom, although there might be a mix. And speaking of New York City's history, looking at some of the older models for supportive housing that have come back and done what's called sort of second generation renovations. One of the things that I've seen done is reducing the room count to add more private bathrooms, because having, you know, rooms without bathrooms, having people like to share sort of the gang showers is a very old model that I don't think, you know, the folks who do even supportive housing doesn't really work, and it doesn't give your residents that level of dignity. So what type of housing are you seeking, you know, to incentivize with small and shared housing? Even, the Presbyterian and the medical center, they have a dorm building, which they said their students and interns will not stay in there. I mean, it's like they have to build a new building. So, you know, to some extent, that's part of the population. You're saying they need smaller units, but they don't want to be in a building where they have just a room and they have to share, you know, toilets and showers.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'd say we're not trying to incentivize anything. We're just trying to stop prohibiting it, stop outlawing it. Going back to the housing blueprint, that lays out where that ban came from in the 1950s and why we did it, prejudice, exclusion. You know, you go to neighborhoods today that still have SROs, and like all you hear is protect the SROs. We don't want to lose the SROs. We love our SROs. So, you know, we're not incentivizing it, but we are enabling, you know, market rate and regulatory agreement, shared housing. We have heard from providers and from HPD that we actually don't expect that many units to have shared bathrooms. To the extent that they do, like I said, the limits are going to be pretty tight, 2 or 3 per. And once you're talking about that 2 or 3 residents per, once you're talking about that, like, it's not different from the way that roommate situations work today. I mean, when I moved to New York after law school, I moved into a house in Sunset Park with people I didn't know at all. I think there were 6 people in there. I rented a room for $600 a month. I shared bathrooms with people I didn't know. I shared kitchens with people I didn't know. And even though that's technically illegal, you know, like, I just subleased a room from whoever was on the lease at the house. Happens all over the place. So it's not like just unfathomable or anything like that. So we're just trying to formalize that, enable that. When you formalize things, enable it, then, you know, people are less vulnerable in those types of situations. And that's what we're looking to do. But it's not, you know, some of the scariest things you might be thinking of based on the old models. It's, you know, it's modern. It's a thing that's happening around the country, and we no longer think it makes sense to prohibit it here either.
So then the second part of my question is, if it's an entity that is not affiliated with any kind of nonprofit organization, there's no common theme in terms of who the residents are there age limits, right? Like, can a mom with 2 babies come in and rent a single room and live there? Are there, you know, it seems to me, right, like this maybe needs some fleshing out. If you have a nonprofit and there's people with a common thread and there's programming and there's somebody that can kind of establish rules and, you know, kind of like common goals for who lives there, I understand that more, right? But like, we've got these single rooms. There's more people than technically get reported living in apartments across the city, right? There's families of 9 people that live in a 1-bedroom apartment everywhere throughout the city. So like, who's going to enforce that in this building? And, you know, what happens when the kids are running around in the hallways at midnight? And I don't know.
What happens now when that happens?
So, yeah, I mean, exactly. So
right? Like, you're looking at these huge buildings. So you're not talking about like a building with 50 units. You're talking about what, like the way I envision this, it sounds to me like a hotel, right?
I don't know. People's imaginations run wild for some reason around shared housing. They're like, oh my God, the sky will fall. It happens all over the city today, just in informal situations. It happens formally in jurisdictions all over the country. The sky does not fall. Groups like Common that run shared housing have incentives to make sure that it's not chaos in those things, or nobody's going to want to rent for them. You know,
But
they
is
want
that
to
a
make money.
public- Like
Yeah.
is that an organization or a private?
And so
Yeah.
it's regulated. It is a regulated market, and it would be a regulated market here. The city survived a fair housing challenge within the last 15 years, I think. No kids in shared housing. And that's not a violation of the Fair Housing Act, you know, for reasons that you might be able to think of. But again, this happens in an informal basis in New York all the time. People negotiate it. It happens formally in other jurisdictions. We think it's an important niche to fill so that you can get people out of the informal market into the formal market where they'll be less vulnerable. And the companies that do this, that are already operating around the country, have done a pretty good job at minimizing those conflicts, because if there's conflicts, nobody wants to rent from them and they don't make any money. And there's a regulatory oversight there as well that HPD is better versed on than I am, but we're working with them on that too.
Right. Okay, we got a couple hands here in the room, but I just want to say that, at least from my perspective, when I think of smaller shared housing, I don't think of the sky falling down. You know, I am familiar with a number of models at different scales that can work, but I think the point that I'm making, that Indiana's making, is it's just not quite clear what it is this goal is seeking to, you know, streamline the process for. So it can be any number of things. And quite frankly, if you look at the history of New York City, you know, you've got SROs and as you pointed out, people who simply are using their house, quote unquote, illegally, but that's a model that has worked. And, you know, there are more established things like, I think an example that was given was the Barbizon, where, you know, it's a hotel. The hotel had a purpose at that time. It was for, you know, women, but there are a number of models that have worked. I at least am just trying to get a sense of what is it you're trying to get to. And it might be any number of those based upon the location and the density. But, you know, there's just a lot of fleshing out and clarification that would be helpful. I don't know who was first. Was it
Jim?
Jim, then Anthony, then Heidi?
Thank you. I think the recent discussion it sort of encompasses a very general principle, which is sort of obvious. Obviously, when you want to have a lot of people have housing, you can't build, you know, giant rooms. You know, it's not practical. So you have other arrangements. You know, you put houses in places where they might not have been. You have shared housing and such. But the key, and this is what I see, as you go in this direction of providing housing for more people, the housing we seem to be describing is less and less optimal. Now with normal buildings, we have the zoning, and I think ignoring the shared housing at the moment, these additional buildings all have to follow the zoning. So there's sort of some lower limit on how awful the housing can be. But that's my point, because we don't want to sanction or whatever the kind of stuff that was going on a long time ago. We don't want the kind of housing that we're building now, which we're designing for people with less income, to turn into places, which you sort of alluded to earlier, where people don't want to live, or Wayne alluded to that in terms of some form or something. The thing is, and I have great confidence that you're doing this right, but this is, you know, this general principle of, you know, keep on cramming in more people and you make it their condition of doing worse. At some point, cross the line, and you yourself have, you know, allowed slums or whatever once again. So I just want to be assured, and I'm sure you'll be able to do that, because again, I'm sure a great deal of thought was put into this. But that's exactly what we don't want. Even if you're the poorest New Yorker and you live in some of the new housing, you should, as someone say, you know, be treated with dignity. You should have a home that is dignified, that is clean, that is, you know, in an environment that's somewhat under control. so that you don't have, you know, crazy people screaming in the halls all night. And so it's just, and again, I'm sure you'll be able to do it, but that's the assurance I think we all want, that we don't overdo it and, you know, keep on cramming in people and ultimately being unfair to them.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You got to comply with the zoning, you got to comply with code, you got to comply with housing maintenance code, you got to comply with the MDL. And in general, like, if you're going to build new construction, you know, it's going to be brand spanking new, it's going to be efficient, it's going to have modern mechanical systems and everything like that. Like, it's hard for me to envision new housing that is enabled through this, new construction housing that's enabled through this, that won't be a ton better than the average existing unit that we have out there on the market today. And, you know, housing supply issue isn't just a housing cost issue. It's not just an issue with gentrification and displacement pressures, overcrowding, homelessness. It also enables landlords to rent out the crappiest apartments imaginable for really high rents, because there's just like not enough of it. And so building more housing is also an important housing quality strategy, even apart from the changes to the bulk regulations that I outlined to help move us away from, you know, crappy types of housing like bar buildings with double loaded corridors towards some of the, you know, more humane styles that it sounds like many of you live in. I'm in Hillman houses down in Lower East Side, built in the 1950s. So my kitchen has a window, my bathroom has a window. It's great. I want more people to share in the benefits of light and air of the new housing that we can create.
So I have some follow-up questions with regards to the small and shared housing proposal. So the first is, I think, somewhat related to what Indiana had started to ask about. When you talk about things that will go into the code, requirements such as number of people to whatever amenity, bathroom, refrigerator, who's actually going in and making sure that the landlords are imposing that from the perspective of both the lease doesn't have too many people on it, but if the lease doesn't have, or if the lease has the correct number of tenants, that there aren't more people still living in the apartment.
Right, HPD writes and HPD enforces.
Okay. The second question I have is, you know, when you talked about this proposal, I think much earlier in the night, you framed it more in the context of medium and high density, but it's under the citywide. So what was the thinking behind making it a citywide proposal as opposed to just putting it under medium and high density?
I mean, you know, we're enabling multifamily housing in lower density districts as well. Ostensibly, that's allowed in many low density districts today. I think 12 out of 18 low density districts allow 2 or more family housing. And so we wanted to enable rooming units, shared housing more broadly. And we have done that basically anytime a lot can enable more than 2 units. So can enable what's technically multiple dwellings under state law, that you can have shared housing in those types of units. And so that gets you a pretty broad range of zoning districts. You know, it works in medium and high density. It works in lower density too.
I mean, a single family house that is, you know, as you point out, used so that, you know, folks are renting rooms would be smaller shared housing. So
Well, here's the deal. For a 1-family home or a 2-family home, each of those families, while you don't need to be a blood relation, you have to be living as a common household, and everybody has to have access to the entire unit. When we talk about shared housing, we're talking about, I rent my room.
No,
You're not allowed
I
to come in my room. I'm not allowed to go in yours. So it's,
I understand. The reality is, though, that, you know, whether it's allowed or not, I'm sure there are single family homes where folks are, you know, renting out the rooms.
You're darn
Particularly
tootin',
if
yeah.
you have a large enough house, or, you know, if you had kids and they're gone. I guarantee you that, like, when I was in graduate school, they were single family homes where, you know, they were being used as shared housing.
It's true.
So
You are
even-
allowed to have a certain number of boarders and lodgers, is the archaic term that's used in your 1-family home or 2-family home as well. So
Yeah.
there's some permission for that.
So I had a couple questions, although, you know, a number of the thoughts I had were covered by my colleagues. One of the things that struck me regarding the proposal for new zoning districts is, and there was a lot of lobbying to raise the 12 FAR cap. And this was another example where the examples given for why it was a good thing really don't help. Because one example was, once again, like the San Remo and those apartments that are, architecturally wonderful. And, the zoning, would not allow that to be built today. And if you lift the cap, we'll be able to get, great architecture like that again. The reality is lifting the cap allows you to get the density. It doesn't control design. So you can get an uninspired, box. But what really strikes me as being odd is the overall concept of having a little bit of housing everywhere, as opposed to concentrating in certain areas. There are a few areas in the city now that even have, an FAR of, 10. And so in areas where you'd have an FAR over 12, I think there was one of FAR 15 or 18. I mean, outside of Manhattan, I think maybe the developments that Vernado wants to do around Penn Station or maybe something in the World Trade Center. So why is that even in a proposal that's really aimed at doing a little bit all over the place?
Well, first off, these proposals do not apply 15 or 18 anywhere at all, period. So it's not enabling 15 or 18. It's creating districts that could be used.
Those are the two examples that were given in either in the presentation or in response.
We're creating districts that would be able to be mapped in the future. That will take planning work. It'll take a ULURP and it'll take MIH in order to do that. So these proposals are not applying 15 or 18 anywhere. But I'll tell you why they make sense in the context of a proposal that enables a little bit more everywhere. I've gone to meetings across the city, from the lowest density parts of the city to the highest density parts of the city, and have been saying to everybody, here are our proposals to create a little more housing everywhere. Folks, we're all in this together. Every neighborhood's going to do their part. You know what the one exception is? It's neighborhoods that are rezoned to 12 FAR today. State law ties our hands. We can't really enable a little more housing in places that are already zoned up against the cap. Where are those places? Those tend to be the most central, the best access to jobs and transit, not incidentally some of the wealthiest parts of the city, not incidentally some of the whitest parts of the city. And that is the one, those are the one parts of the city where we could not give them a little more housing because they're already up against the cap. And I cannot tell you how anti-planning that is, how anti-policy that is, how anti-fair housing that is, to, if we're doing a citywide, to exempt only the most central, whitest, wealthiest parts of the city from these initiatives. And so that's why I'm extremely excited to have something like this that enables us to do a little bit more there, once we go through ULURPs in the future. Unfortunately, our hands are tied today. So that's why it's like a fair housing issue, like the rest of these components.
Yeah, but I think I don't know if it was city planning's information or another agency that was looking at where affordable housing has been built in the city. And I believe the one neighborhood in the city where there was absolutely zero affordable housing built was the Upper East Side. And, so that's probably one of those,
Big problem, yeah.
Well-located, very white, very wealthy areas. But I guess the question is, we're using zoning as an incentive to build more. And in an area like that, do you think developers are at all attracted by that incentive? I mean, they could build their Robert A.M. Stern, apartment buildings on Lexington and 86, and they really don't need the 20% bump.
Well, I think the CHO proposals, even in the highest density districts, create new incentives to go rental rather than condo. If you're in an R10 or R10 equivalent under our proposals and you want to do condo, well, sorry, bub, you're capped at 10 FAR. If you want to max out your site, if you want to get to 12, The only way to do that is to provide affordable housing. So if you're a condo and you want to provide affordable housing, great. Maybe you could do it on site. Maybe, you know, you can participate in UAP's limited offsite option that'll exist for the next 10 years. But you also might take a look at that site and say, I'm not going to be able to max out unless I go rental, unless I take 45X and go all the way up to 12, in which case you're going to have at least 2 FAR of affordable housing at an average of 60% AMI, which will be great. If the Upper East Side doesn't build, if the Upper West Side doesn't build, you know, then people are coming, they're coming for you in Northern Manhattan because they can't find housing down there. And so I would say another core issue here is to try to enable more housing in places like the Upper East, Upper West, that have actually shrunk. Some of the neighborhood tabulation areas in those neighborhoods have actually lost housing units through unit combinations and things like that. And that's not just a problem for those neighborhoods, it's a problem for the adjacent neighborhoods. It's a problem for the entire city as well.
I do hope that a lot of like those apartments integrated in like those very, very nice fancy buildings, that they do have at least like more or less the same kind of like amenities that the fancier apartments have. That's like my only thing, because I've worked in a place where there's like a $7 million condo and it's super, super nice. And then after that, you have like the affordable apartments like closer to the ground where you don't have a nice view and all that. Just to kind of like we have to get some lesser income people in here. Like let's just like kind of like, you know, design them to put them somewhere at the bottom and just shove them in the corner, you know. And then all our other nicer space, like we're definitely gonna put that for like everything up and above, you know.
Those are great points. Basically, we have regulations for the affordable units created through zoning, equal access to amenities, and unit distribution requirements. You can't cluster all the units in the basement or whatever. You have to have affordable units on every single floor, and they can't have separate entrances. You can't have differential access to amenities. And we're including additional language that gives HPD sort of more floating oversight for any aspect of a mixed income building that would stigmatize residents of the affordable housing. HPD can come in and put a stop to that before the building even gets built.
Marble floors for everybody.
Yeah, yeah,
They're very cold to walk on.
yes.
Many of the materials say that you guys project 100,000 new units, specifically around 20,000 affordable ones. What made up the projection? I'm especially interested given that the UAP is discretionary. So what's constituting that projection? And I saw that you guys have averaged out across the neighborhoods, but does the average take into account the differences between lower density and higher density districts?
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. So the projections underlying those are a market analysis across the city that analyzes market conditions in each neighborhood tabulation area, 197 of them across the city that allow residential. Market topology, like is it single family? Is it, you know, modest multifamily? Is it medium? Is it high density? So market conditions, market typology, and then capacity in the neighborhood. It also takes into account to what extent there are sites, to what extent they're built out, to what extent we expect redevelopment of certain types of sites. When it comes to UAP, you know, the whole time we've been working on this for a number of years now, these zoning proposals. When it comes to UAP, we were holding our breath, crossing our fingers all along that the tax benefit would wind up in a good place. All the affordable units that we create through zoning, whether it's the old voluntary programs, whether it's the new mandatory inclusionary housing programs, depend on a workable tax benefit for support. The idea being that the tax benefit and the zoning work together to create more affordable units at lower AMIs than either one can alone. In the absence of a workable tax benefit, MIH is not feasible. You can look at the MIH feasibility analysis that we published in 2016. Voluntary, nobody does that either. We think that the state tax benefit ended up in a good place, and that is going to be the financial engine for UAP. So together they will work, the zoning will work with the tax incentive, 20,000 units, affordable income restricted apartments. That's just what will be created on mixed income privately financed sites. You layer into that 100% affordable from HPD, and we're talking even more permanently income restricted affordable apartments in the next 10 to 15 years.
Sorry, just a quick question. Do you have the
She-
number again?
Actually, no, she,
Go ahead.
I haven't seen that like really fleshed out anywhere about the mandatory inclusionary housing and how that relates. So if you've got anything besides what's available online, if you could please share it with us, that'd be great.
Sure thing. So MIH exists. It will continue to exist. These are incremental changes. These are not big moves in any one place. In the future, whenever there are zoning actions like a rezoning that significantly increase residential capacity, say you're going from R6 to an R8A or something like that, MIH would be applied. It will continue to apply, and it will mandate a set aside of a given percentage and AMIs at a certain percentage for any new development there. We are making some changes to how MIH works through CHO. Number one, at the request of the speaker, other council members, various housing advocates, we're making option 3, formerly known as the deep affordability option. That's a 20% set aside at 40% AMI. We're making that available as a standalone option. That is, if the community board and the CPC and the council agree, you can map that, and that's the only option that developers would have. They have to provide 20% and an average of 40%. Also, we are enabling, we're making MIH work better with 100% affordable homeownership. Today, there are conflicts between the way the zoning text works and the way that HPD term sheet, their open door affordable homeownership term sheet works. We're eliminating that conflict. I can say when I was working on MIH 10 years ago, nobody at HPD was that interested in affordable homeownership. You know, council wasn't that interested in affordable homeownership either. The winds have changed on that. And so we're really trying to make the changes to make that work really well as well. So we are making some changes to make MIH work better. It will continue to apply in the future.
Okay.
I have a question about the UAP, and I think it's something that I asked last time. Because based on your presentation, I mean, you were showing CB12, it appeared that you were proposing to map UAP along Broadway and along Fort Washington Avenue. And the question was, Broadway, I understood. Fort Washington was contrary to everything CB12 has shared with city planning. But in addition to that, when we did our neighborhood planning study, one of the things that was pointed out is like Broadway and Amsterdam and parts of St. Nick were the wide two-way avenues where it seemed logical for you to, you know, incentivize some more density. So is UAP something that is literally mapped like a zoning district, or is it applicable to on a per project basis?
UAP applies everywhere in medium and high density districts other than MIH areas. So the only exception in a medium and high density district is if you're in an MIH area. And, you know, it works differently in different zoning districts, but the basic formula is this: take your market rate floor area and keep it where it is. So if you got it today, you got it tomorrow. Float affordable and supportive housing above that to the senior affordable house, existing senior affordable housing FAR. Most medium and high density districts have a higher FAR for senior affordable housing. We're extending that to all forms of affordable and supportive. If it's a district that doesn't have a senior bump today, we're creating a new 20% bump for all forms of affordable and supportive housing. So that ranges everything from, if you're in an R6B district today, you have a max market rate of 2, 20% above that is 2.4. So you'd have still have a cap of 2 FAR for your market rate. If you wanted to max out to 2.4, great. That's got to be permanent, affordable housing at an average of 60% AMI.
Yeah,
You
no,
go-
I- I get that, and actually, when we were discussing the R7A example at the last meeting, it was pointed out that in R7A now, you can do, I think, the FAR of 5 for senior housing, and all the UAP would do would allow you to do it for any affordable housing, but I mean, it's not something that you can't do now. But there was a slide, and I'm looking at maybe the wrong presentation, but there was a slide that pertained to UAP, and, you know, the question is, how does this impact specifically CB12? And in that slide, it appeared that, you know, there was a darker shade mapping along Broadway and then Fort Washington. And it was like, Fort Washington is a narrower street, and it's part of that area west of Broadway that's zoned R8, where the current zoning is completely at odds with the existing built form. And, you know, we had reduced to writing in one or more resolutions asking for city planning to apply contextual zoning in that area. So not to shrink wrap it, but to allow new development that would be more fitting with the existing, and to instead, you know, say we're going to map something that encourages R8 plus another 20% is going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, that's a zoning map change. So UAP just builds on whatever the zoning district is today. And so, you know, if indeed it's an R8, it's an R8, not, it's an R8.
It's an R8.
Yeah, then you would get the same, basically, I believe, a 6 FAR market cap, and you get up to 7.2 for affordable. If that is inappropriate, or if the community board believes it's inappropriate, then, you know, it is a map change that you would need in order to remedy that situation.
Yep, and that is, I think you've got that that resolution for a year or two. And actually, I think in Mark Levine's Housing Manhattanites report, which came out last January, he also referenced that sort of the area from 155th to, I don't know if you went, we said to go all the way to 177, because I think for some strange reason, that area up to 177 to 178 is R8. And once you get above that, it goes back to R72. And actually, when you go into CB9, the area west of Broadway is also R8. Don't know why. But
1961.
You know,
1961,
but
that was, yeah.
Is when you look at the buildings on Fort Washington, and it's a densely built avenue, but an R8 building is completely out of context, you know, with that. And there are not many development sites, which is also why, you know, the mapping would seem to be, is it encouraging the demolition of existing affordable housing? But there were a lot of questions. So that's why it wasn't clear whether there was a proposal to map something on Fort Washington, or if that was an example, but it was just a confusing slide is the point.
Yeah, I think probably the darker color that you were seeing is, those are districts that don't have an existing bump for senior affordable. And so those are districts where if we want them to participate, we have to create a new bump for affordable and supportive. And I would say the big driver of that was neighborhoods like the Upper West and Upper East Side, where you have a lot of R8B. R8B doesn't have a bump for senior affordable. If we left Upper East and Upper West Side out of our fair housing proposal, I mean, I would sue us. And so we proposed to create a new bump for affordable and supportive in, for instance, R8B, so that they're not left out.
Okay, so I want to point out that it's 9:03, but as I started this conversation, there's a lot to digest, and I'm not quite clear that we're going to be able to digest it this evening.
I have a curious question just of John itself, because it's like super amazing that he's like able to even recite like all this information, and how long
because he's a pro.
Yeah, no, but like just out of curiosity, like how many pages, how long and how many people it took you guys just to even get through this whole thing?
Isn't it like 1,000 pages long?
Like 1,500?
Well, we've been working on it for a number of years. The zoning text got released back in April. It's deceptive because the way zoning works is a lot of those pages are just deletions or relocations, or you cut and paste the same thing in the residential regs, and then you got to do it again in the commercial regs, and then you got to do it again in the special districts. So we have a document now that we can share with you that kind of boils it all down and just shows you the zoning references for each component and where you should go if you want to take a look.
I think some folks would find that very useful.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, going back to my point for the committee and the board, I mean, you know, when folks say they're either for or against City of Yes for housing, my question is, you're for or against which of the 15 goals? Because it is not one thing. So, and as I said, reading through the responses to some of the questions raised by our colleagues in other community boards helped to clarify for me some of the questions I had. But as I mentioned, and I shared with everyone, you know, I went through the worksheet and did my initial thoughts and, you know, will, you know, modify that. But I don't know if we are ready to digest this all and have a resolution to vote on at this minute, unless I'm reading the room wrong.
May I ask something from like a purely administrative perspective? I don't, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know of any area of our community district that would be considered low density. And so why would, maybe it's just me, but why would we comment on those four?
It's the architect planner in me.
Okay, I see. I guess I'm just.
It will become low density when you start getting more 30-story buildings.
But no,
Yes.
let's step back for a second and say we are members of a land use committee, and land use deals with, you know, planning and urban design and things of that nature. So, town center zoning. I mean, and they're talking about, you know, buildings that have ground floor commercial. I mean, that's consistent with traditional New York City building type. It's a very familiar building type. And although, I mean, they're looking at, you know, 3 or 4, look at any tenement building here. It's 5 stories, so technically it's not, you know, in that time, but it's the same building type. And I could show you parts of, you know, 3rd Avenue in East Harlem, or even 2nd Avenue in Murray Hill, where they have these 3-story buildings that have ground floor retail and, you know, 2 floors of apartment above it. So from a planning perspective, that makes sense. Transit-oriented development, once again, from a planning perspective, development and urbanization has traditionally been driven by access to transit. This area of Manhattan was driven by the extension of Riverside Drive and the number 1 train. So although we are not a low density area, from a planning perspective, we said that sort of makes sense because that's how urban areas have developed, you know, over the centuries. Accessory dwelling units. What's interesting is when we run across things like some of the carriage houses near Washington Square Park or, you know, around Gramercy, I say, oh, how cute that is. It's wonderful. That's the kind of stuff. They were not originally residential. It was something else. That's kind of what they're talking about. So when we say, why would you do that? It's like, it's old and we find it charming when we run across it. But it would not be legal to do it today. And then give homeowners the flexibility to adapt their homes. Folks are doing it anyway, but you want them to do it safe. So there are a number of things that are in this low density that from a planning perspective, we might want to comment on it because we think it makes sense. I mean, and we might want to comment on if we thought this made absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
You know, we've commented on things in other community districts because we supported it or because we thought from a moral, whatever position, this makes no sense. But
So we can support some of the, you know, the 15 initiatives and not support the one that is not working for us.
exactly, that's
So
the
we can
point.
say that, no, I'm saying we should state that in the resolution that.
Yes, no, but that's what we did with the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity. We supported some, we didn't support others, and we suggested modifications to yet a 3rd set. That's what we did.
We did that philosophy.
Right, but my point is just that what I'm trying to say that I don't want I don't want that to become like, oh, Community Board 12 supported City of Yes, while what we're saying is like, sure, we are supporting some things, but there's some things that we're not going to support.
I think we have a history of writing clear land use resolution. So if there are things that we support and things that we don't support, and everyone, right, gets an opportunity to review the resolution to make sure that it's saying, you know, but at this juncture, my suggestion is the same, and what I asked everyone to do, the same way that I went through this and said, for each of them, what do you think about each of them? I suggest everyone do that. And Catherine said she was going to share this with the entire board. And I just forwarded the 34-page document to Catherine Ebenezer, asked them to share it with the entire board, because it's going to be a disaster if we come to the general meeting. Let's say we came up with a resolution that we ended up the executive committee to pass it. If folks have not read through all of that Q&A, that's going to happen at the general meeting.
I think it won't happen.
Yeah. But even in that proposal of looking through all 15, you don't think that we're prepared tonight? I mean, I don't, but I don't know, but like.
You know, because there are, yeah, I see that. I am 1/3 of the way through reading through the 34-page document, and some of the discussion there helped to clarify stuff. Like, for example, when Jim was talking about the campus infill, nowhere in here in the presentation does it say that the new development has to be contextual, it has to be 100% affordable. But knowing that helps inform what I think about it.
Yeah.
And in terms of the sliver, one of the, if you looked at what I sent, one of the ones that I questioned, I said, what are the benefits? But if no matter what you do, there's going to be some height limit that's applied. It's just that in some cases, contextual zoning is going to take over. In other cases, quality housing is going to take over. You know, that then, and if it's less than 45 feet, then it still applies. That then informs what I think about it. So I want to finish reading through that document, which is very useful, and go through this, one more time. I mean, I'm sorry, but, unfortunately, this was referred to us on April 28th. We had a very good presentation at the beginning of May, but we're getting it now. And unfortunately, we have until, I think, July 8th or so, although city planning said they will continue to take comments, through, when they do the vote, but Indiana, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify exactly on point. 2 questions. One, is this a ULURP process officially? And the reason that I asked that is because I vaguely remember in one of the info sessions that I attended virtually saying that technically it's not, or technically we don't have the 60 days and even the extra 9 days. I think in theory, almost like this is a self-imposed 60-day was my impression. I could be wrong, so I'm just asking for clarification.
No, the way that the zoning text is changed is a ULURP-like, but not technically a ULURP. It's not one of the enumerated things that require ULURP. From a community board perspective and for the perspective of the commission and city council, they typically look almost identical. However, that's the way we've always done them.
But it's not a requirement in the law.
The main difference, I would say, is that the city planning commission is allowed to sit on a text amendment for as long as they want. You can't do that with a ULURP. Similarly, the city planning commission can refuse to refer a text amendment. You can't do that with a ULURP. If I'm a private landowner and my application's complete, I get access to ULURP. But when it comes to the zoning text, the city planning commission has a little bit more authority, purview over it to prevent certain things from happening.
And do they have the authority to say, this is the deadline when we're going to stop receiving?
We've already said, so we are having a hearing in July. We're not voting. The city planning commission is not voting until September. The commission absolutely will accept any resolutions or anything else from community boards and consider it up to that vote in September. It is helpful to have it a little bit ahead of the vote so that we can fully digest it. you mentioned earlier the worksheet. I would love to show you the bar charts that we create from all the community board input for every single component of these
I
proposals.
would love to see it.
For EO, so that you can see at a glance which of the 18 proposals for EO has strong support, which has strong disapproval, what's in between. We will absolutely do that for this as well, so that we have textured understanding of community board feedback. And we encourage you to provide feedback on low density stuff too. We all live in this city. Your neighborhood is affected by what happens in low density New York as well. And so I think it's totally, it's totally right and just that you would comment on those proposals too.
Yep. September what?
Date has been set yet. I think there probably are only two opportunities to vote in September. I don't know what they are.
But is it like mid-September, late September?
Hasn't been set yet. So I'm not really sure what the intel is. We're hearing from city council. They don't want to have to deal with it till after Labor Day. And so we will oblige them on that.
We meet on the 4th, right?
You know what I'm saying?
September 4th,
Yeah. When is Labor Day?
the 2nd, on the Monday.
So,
I'm just thinking, since it's like between us and us, meaning it's us New Yorkers, there is no developer in that, right? There's none of the regular ULURP kind of thing. Why can't you, as the city planning, you are city planning, why can't you say, hey, you know what? We will allow you to submit the resolution until, I don't know, September 30th. And we will vote on October 1st or September 20th, and we will vote on September 25th.
why don't you just move the vote to October is what you're saying?
Even the end of September, whichever it is.
Well, no, but if they move it to October, that means we'd be able to go through a full month cycle worth
Right,
of stuff
But
and
I'm
clean
just
it up.
giving a really simple reason here that there is no developer between us and you.
Yes, but I was giving them a specific proposal.
But, okay. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly,
So
and I was.
as us New Yorkers, we all like kind of friend with each other and everything. I think we should work together so everyone are happy for the sake of being happy for the process of getting it done.
Isn't that what we're doing?
That
here?
was
Well, so, but I was taking OC's question and simply saying the city planning, can city planning move its vote from September to October, which will allow community boards the full month of September to have yet another committee meeting and a general meeting?
I think that's a
Good question.
wonderful
Can I
idea.
respond to that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's the deal. It's obviously I can't speak for the commission or anybody else other than myself, but the speaker of the city council, she has told us in no uncertain terms that they need to vote on this by the end of the year.
Right,
Next
but that
next year's an
October-
election year. It doesn't give them, moving that vote into October for a city planning commission would push that into next year, because council's of course going to have modifications. And we do not want to alienate, the folks whose cooperation we absolutely need in order to accomplish anything here. So I can't speak for anybody, but I would say it is extremely unlikely for political reasons and also for just policy substance. These are huge problems. We want to, start working on them as soon as we can. I think it's unlikely that we would be able to move the vote into October. I have not heard anybody suggest that that's remotely a possibility.
Yeah, well, I mean, we agree that it's huge problems, and, and very detailed, which is why it would have been great to have received the information like a month earlier, so that where we are now, we would have had this conversation last month, but we are where we are. At 9:18,
I would just like to, and I know you don't control the commission and all that, but ideally, if they don't want to have it in October, then consistent with what we've been requesting, and I have a feeling it's a sentiment of community boards throughout the city, have the hearing later in September so we can still have process, because we have a mechanism to get stuff to you in fact, once this committee meets, we can actually get stuff to you because we have mechanisms to do that. But as I think it is obvious to you, And I think all of us are thrilled with the care and the thoughtfulness that has been presented to us. But we need time to digest this, and we cannot do that this month.
Yeah, and frankly, you did an excellent job of pulling together. I think you received, well over 100 questions from Manhattan of, pulling them together and sending them. We should have the opportunity to, digest what you have to say.
Wow. Is submitting a comment by the actual deadline, July 8th, is that treated any differently than us submitting a comment after that, but before the vote?
No, I mean, with the caveat that if it comes like the day before the vote, then you miss out on a lot of the consideration. I'd say the prime time for the city planning commission and city planning considering feedback is between the hearing in July and the vote in September. The earlier within that window that we have feedback from you, then the longer period of time we have to consider it and integrate it into all the other feedback. We will consider it if it comes in, at the end of August or early September. But, by then, maybe some of the decisions will have been made about what's going to happen, and it would just be less impactful feedback.
Right. So what I'm going to encourage my fellow committee members to do is, to sort of do what I did, is to go through the checklist and, to OC's point, for each and every one, check, do you support it or not? Or in some cases, I put a question mark because I wasn't quite clear. But in that box, and unfortunately, this is not a fillable form, Audrey. If you could provide one, but, sort of jot down what your concerns are, because, we can consolidate that, and that can be the beginning of our resolution. I mean, I will go through this again and share it with everyone. But, as I said, I've commented on each and every one of them. So when someone says, I'm going to vote against it, which of the 15 it's are they voting against or for?
You send that out one more time, because I can't find
Yeah,
it.
well, actually,
You want me to send it to you right now?
Thank
yeah,
you,
I will
appreciate
send
that.
it again, but I think, I thought this was something that would be able to go in and, type in the box, but, it's not that kind of a PDF.
I can do that.
Yeah, I think if you open it in Adobe, if you have it, you can click edit PDF, and that should bring up a fillable option.
Yeah, I was trying to do that and it wouldn't let me. If you have a
Okay.
fillable form that you can just send that's already unlocked, that would be great, or in Word form.
I'll come in.
Sure. Let me see what I can do. That's
Right.
a good flag. Thank you.
Because that'll make it easier to combine comments.
You want to send me what you have, right?
I got you. I'll send it
Okay,
right now.
so
Yeah, no
um,
problem.
it is 9:22. Do we have any old business?
Yes. Very old business.
Super old.
Yes, the library,
The new
Well,
one?
Inwood Library.
Yeah.
I do remember that we, at least that.
Are you talking about the Eliza or something else?
No, the library on, is that that's the name for it, Eliza?
The building?
The new.
Yeah.
The Eliza, yes.
Okay, so I'm talking specifically about the library. I do remember that at least I asked the developer to incorporate the gates. The gates, the old audio
I-
gates, and they said, yes, we will.
And they turn
Where is the gate? I'm not asking you, Wayne, I'm just putting it out as we should, in my view, go back to the developer and ask him, where is the gate? Because, remember we talked about how we want to,
Yes,
okay, so, that's my old business. Where's the gate? He said that he will incorporate it in a design.
they said, yes. Is
Oh,
there any,
okay.
is there any new business?
No.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
It is 9:24. We are adjourned, but we have lots of homework to do.
Yeah, Wayne,
Homework.
can I volunteer to write
Thank you.
the resolution for the faith-based affordable housing act? Can I write that directly?
You are happy, you are very welcome to volunteer.
Thank you.
Yo, thanks, John. Thanks, Audrey, for coming in.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank
Looking
you
forward
very
to
much for having
continuing it.
us. Yeah, if you have any more questions, please send them our way.
Yes, and John, I hope you didn't miss the fact that Daniel wanted to know how you were able to do all of this wonderful work. He thinks you're brilliant.
I appreciate it. Not all meetings end on that note.
Yeah.
You really did a great job. Thank you.
Take care.